In Des Plaines, Illinois, near Chicago, a man who served time in prison for sex crimes was let out. Today, they found the bodies of at least 3 young boys buried under his house. He is charged with murder. Here's Jim Cummings.
Police have been watching John Gacy's suburban Chicago home for the past 10 days. They became suspicious when 15-year-old Robert Peast disappeared after he allegedly was last seen with Gacy. This morning, police searched Gacy's home and found the decomposed remains of 3 bodies in a dirt crawl space under the house. They suspect there are several more bodies buried here.
Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're going to be discussing John Wayne Gacy. For those who don't know who John Wayne Gacy is, he was an American serial killer. He assaulted and murdered at least 33 young men and boys. We're going to be taking a look at his life, his murders, and his downfall in this case study. So, sit back, relax, and let's dive in. Born on March 17, 1942 in Chicago, Illinois, John was the only son of John Stanley Gacy and Marion Elaine Robinson. Gacy and his 2 sisters grew up in a hostile environment largely due to his father's alcoholism. All the children suffered abuse by their father and would learn to toughen up against the beatings. As a child, Gacy was overweight and unathletic due to his congenital heart condition. Gacy seldom received his father's approval and was always belittled by him. He would also suffer further alienation at school since he was unable to do physical activities. In 1949, Gacy would have his first sexual experience when a family friend molested him. He would never tell his family about the incidents, but would later attribute this to his sexuality. By 18, Gacy realized he liked men more than he did women. That same year, he would become involved in politics. He found work as an assistant precinct captain for the Democratic Party candidate in his neighborhood. After a conflict involving his father, Gacy left the family home at 18 and headed for Las Vegas. He found work as a mortuary attendant and observed for 3 months morticians embalming bodies. Later, Gacy confessed that during this time, he climbed into the coffin of a deceased teenage male. He embraced and caressed the body. In complete shock, the event prompted him to phone home and ask to come back. John would return back to Chicago and enroll in Northwestern Business College and graduate in 1963. He took a management trainee position with the Nunn Bush Shoe Company. In 1964, he was transferred to Springfield, Illinois to work as a salesman and was eventually promoted to manager. During the same year, he became engaged to Marilyn Myers, a co-worker. Gacy joined the local Jaycees chapter and became a tireless worker for the organization. In 1965, Gacy had risen to the position of vice president of the Jaycees. The same year, he would be named the 3rd most outstanding Jaycee in Illinois. John and Marilyn married in September of 1964. Her father would subsequently purchase 3 KFC restaurants in Waterloo, Iowa. The couple relocated there so Gacy could manage the restaurants. Settled in Waterloo, Gacy began to socialize with his young male employees and created a club in his basement. Here, Gacy would allow the young men to drink and recreationally use drugs. In reality, Gacy used this as a way to try and make advances with the boys. He would get them drunk and try his luck. If the boy rebuffed him, he played it off as a test of their morals. Marilyn gave birth to a son in February of 1966 and a daughter in March 1967. Gacy describes this period of his life as perfect. He joined the local chapter of the Jaycees, in which he extended hours to the organization again. He was considered ambitious and held in high regard for his fundraising work. And in 1967, he was named Outstanding Vice President of the Waterloo Jaycees. The Jaycees in Waterloo were involved in shady business such as wife swapping, prostitution, pornography, and drug use, which Gacy himself was very involved in and would regularly engage in relations with prostitutes. In August of 1967, Gacy committed his first known sexual assault on a teenage boy. The victim, 15-year-old Donald Voorhees, was the son of a fellow Jaycee. The boy was lured to Gacy's house with the promise to show him pornographic films. Voorhees was given alcohol and persuaded into performing sexual acts on Gacy. In March 1968, Donald told his father about the assault, and his father contacted the police. Gacy was arrested and charged with sodomy on a child. Of course, he denied these charges and any wrongdoing and insisted the whole thing was politically motivated. As it turns out, Donald's father opposed Gacy's nomination as president of the Jaycees. Many fellow Jaycees believed Gacy, but regardless, he was indicted on May 10, 1968 for sodomy. On August 30, 1968, Gacy persuaded 18-year-old Russell Schroeder to assault Voorhees in an effort to discourage him from testifying against him. The plan went south. Voorhees escaped and turned in Schroeder, who then turned in Gacy. Gacy would gain another charge for assault from the incident. On November 7, 1968, Gacy pleaded guilty to 1 count of sodomy and was convicted on December 3rd. He was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment. On the same day, Marilyn filed for divorce. She requested all assets, custody of the children, and alimony, which she won. During his time in prison, he gained a reputation as a model prisoner, even improving prisoner conditions. He was granted parole with 12 months of probation on June 18, 1970, only serving 18 months of his sentence. He moved back to Chicago with his mother and picked up work as a short-order cook. Gacy again assaulted another boy in February 1971 and was charged. This time, Gacy would get off scot-free due to the victim not appearing for court. His probation never learned of the incident, and 8 months later, Gacy would be off probation. Gacy and his mother bought a house near the village of Norridge in Norwood Park Township. The home was located at 8213 West Somerdale Avenue. This would be his residence until his final arrest, and, according to Gacy, the scene at which he committed all of his murders. Per usual, Gacy became very involved with his community, hosting annual block parties. His neighbors all described him as kind and helpful. Shortly after moving in, Gacy got engaged to Carol Huff, a divorcee with 2 daughters. 1 week before their wedding, Gacy was arrested once again and charged with, you guessed it, sexual assault. The victim claimed Gacy had forced him into the car with a police badge and forced him to perform sexual acts on him. These charges would be dropped this time due to the victim blackmailing Gacy. In 1971, Gacy established a part-time construction business called PDM. But by mid-1973, the business picked up and Gacy was able to quit his job as a cook and fully commit to the business. PDM expanded rapidly and Gacy began working up to 16 hours a day. Much of the employees consisted of young men and teenage boys. It was reported Gacy often propositioned his employees for sex or insisted on sexual favors for acts such as lending vehicles, financial assistance, or promotions. In 1975, Gacy was appointed director of Chicago's Polish Constitution Day Parade. Through his work with the parade, he met then First Lady Rosalind Carter. During this time, Gacy also learned through his Moose Club of the Jolly Joker Clown Club. The members performed for fundraising events and visited sick children. He loved the idea of bringing joy and joined late 1975. He created his own character, Pogo the Clown, and performed at numerous events. This is how Gacy was coined the Killer Clown. The same year, Gacy would also tell Carol that he was bisexual. He began to spend most evenings away from the home. Carol observed him bringing boys into their garage and also found gay porn, men's wallets, and ID cards. She confronted him, and in response, Gacy told her it was none of her business. His wife filed for divorce in October of 1975, to which Gacy agreed. During the summer of that year, John picked up David Cram, a hitchhiker. He offered him a job and let him move into his house. Gacy tried to take advantage of Cram on multiple occasions. After the second altercation, where he was handcuffed and assaulted, he moved out and left PDM, even though he continued to work off and on for Gacy for another 2 years. Shortly after Cram moved out, Michael Rossi moved in. Rossi worked at PDM since 1976, and he lived with Gacy until April of 1977. Gacy met a 16-year-old boy named Timothy McCoy at Chicago's Greyhound bus station on January 2, 1972. This is Gacy's first known murder. McCoy was lured to Gacy's with the promise of giving him a place to stay and also returning him to the station on time. The following day, Gacy recalls he woke up to find McCoy standing in the doorway with a knife. Gacy jumped from the bed and McCoy raised both hands in a gesture of surrender. He tilted the knife upwards and accidentally cut Gacy's forearm. In response, Gacy twisted the knife out of his hand and banged his head against the wall. McCoy kicked Gacy in the stomach, causing him to double over. Gacy then grabbed McCoy, wrestled him to the ground, and stabbed him repeatedly in the chest. As McCoy lay dying, Gacy went to the kitchen and saw the boy was making him breakfast. The whole situation was a misunderstanding, but Gacy realized the ultimate thrill was death. The body was buried in the crawl space, marking the beginning of Gacy's spree. Gacy committed most of his murders between 1976 and 1978, which he coined his cruising years. Officials know Gacy murdered at least 33 young men and boys, 26 of which were buried in his crawl space. Most of the victims were abducted from Chicago's Greyhound bus station, Bughouse Square, or simply off the streets. Some were taken by force, whereas others were conned. Gacy often carried a badge and had spotlights on his black Oldsmobile and played the part of a cop. But many were lured with the promise of a job, alcohol, drugs, or money in exchange for relations. His modus operandi was to lure the boys over and make them comfortable. He then produced a pair of handcuffs to show a magic trick he often used as part of his clown routine. He cuffed his own hands behind his back, then released himself with the key hidden between his fingers. Once out, he offered to show his victims how it worked. When they were shackled with no way out, Gacy would say something along the lines of, "The trick is, you have to have the key." Now with the victim restrained, Gacy would take advantage and torture them for hours. Typically, he would end their suffering with what he called his last trick. He placed a rope tourniquet around their necks before progressively tightening it with a hammer handle. Most victims died from asphyxiation, but not all through the last trick. He would often gag his victims with paper, cloths, and even their own underwear. The gag would be placed so far in their throats that they would suffocate due to the blockage. A few victims even drowned in their own vomit because of Gacy's gags. Once the boy was dead, Gacy placed them under his bed for 24 hours so he could enjoy the company, but once the time was up, the body would be buried in the crawl space. Gacy's downfall began on December 11, 1978, when he visited Neeson Pharmacy in Des Plaines, Illinois. He was discussing a potential remodel job with owner Phil Torf. While within earshot of a 15-year-old part-time employee named Robert Peast, Gacy offhandedly mentioned that his firm hired boys starting at $5 an hour, which was almost double what Peast was earning at the pharmacy. Peast's mother would arrive to pick him up, and Robert would ask her to wait. He insisted he needed to talk to a contractor about a job. He left at 9 p.m. and promised to be back shortly. Peast would be murdered shortly after 10 p.m. at Gacy's home. When he failed to return home, a missing persons report was filed. Police began to look into the case starting at the pharmacy. Torf noted that John Gacy was the contractor that Peast most likely left the store to talk to. Lieutenant Joseph Kozinczak, whose son attended the same school as the boy, chose to pursue Gacy further. A routine check of Gacy's background revealed his dark past. Kozinczak and 2 officers visited Gacy's home that night for questioning. Gacy indicated he saw 2 youths working and asked one of them a question about materials. He remained adamant he didn't know the boy and he didn't offer him a job, and informed them that he only returned to the pharmacy around 8 p.m. because he left his appointment book there. Police asked him to come to the station to submit a statement, but Gacy declined at that moment, stating his uncle died and he was mourning. At 3:20 a.m. the next day, Gacy arrives at the station covered in mud. When questioned, he said he was involved in a minor accident where his car slid off the road. He continued to deny any involvement in Peast's disappearance. Police asked him again about his trip to the pharmacy and why he came back. Gacy held to the story that Torf had called him about his book. This had been a lie, as the police contacted Torf about the claim. They required Gacy to submit a statement detailing his movements from December 11th. A search warrant was served on December 13th for Gacy's property. Although no body was discovered, several suspicious items were: police badges, a 6mm starter pistol, a syringe, handcuffs, books on homosexuality, adult films, capsules of amyl nitrate, an 18-inch adult toy, a 39-inch 2x4 with holes drilled in each end, bottles of Valium and Ostropine, several driver's licenses, a blue hooded parka, underwear too small for Gacy, and a Maine West High School ring. But it didn't belong to Piest. Also recovered from the trash was a receipt from the Neeson pharmacy and a section of nylon rope. Gacy was placed under 24-hour surveillance as the search for his involvement with Piest continued. During this time, police would begin to connect the dots to Gacy and other missing boys through leads and speaking with other family members. In true John Wayne Gacy fashion, he would often invite his surveillance team out to eat or to bars where he would plead his innocence. The surveillance team began to rattle Gacy, though. He accused the police of harassing him due to his political connections and recreational drug use. He taunted them and often accomplished losing the surveillance team when being followed. Cram and Rossi, both prior employees who lived with Gacy, gave formal interviews to the police, further cementing the person Gacy was. On December 17th, Gacy's car and PDM work trucks were examined. Fibers were found that were suspected human hair. Dogs were also brought in to track Piest's scent in any of the vehicles. They got a hit when the dog approached Gacy's car. The dog laid on the passenger seat. This was an action indicating a death occurred, and Piest's body had been in the car. By this point, Gacy really started to show signs of strain from the constant surveillance. He prepared a civil suit against the Des Plaines Police Department demanding the surveillance stop. While he was doing that, the serial numbers from the receipt recovered from his home was tracked to the owner, Kim Byers, a co-worker of Piest. Kim admitted to the police she had worn a blue parka on December 11th to shield herself from the weather. The receipt was placed in the pocket when she started her shift. She loaned the coat to Piest so he could go talk to the contractor about a job. On December 19th, investigators were compiling evidence to issue a second search warrant on Gacy's property. Gacy's civil suit would be filed the same day and a hearing scheduled for the 22nd. Oddly enough, Gacy invited his two surveillance detectives in his home that afternoon. Taking advantage of the opportunity, one detective distracted Gacy with banter while the other looked around. While in the bathroom, he flushed the toilet and noticed a terrible and foul smell emanating out of the heating duct, providing even more cause for another warrant to be issued. Cram and Rossi were brought in for another interview in relation to the disappearance of Robert Piest. Rossi stated Piest could be buried in the crawl space. He speculated that if Gacy were to hide a body, this is where he'd put it. He recalled how Gacy would make him dig trenches and warned him not to deviate from where he was instructed to dig. During Cram's interview, he informed them of Gacy's attempted assault in 1976 and recounts the events for December 13th. After they returned home from the first search of Gacy's property, Gacy turned pale when he saw mud on the floor. He suspected it came from the crawl space and immediately went down to search for any digging. He asked Cram if he had been down there, which Cram said he went to spread lime and dig trenches when ordered. Gacy had told Cram the trenches were for drainage pipes, but Cram recalled the trenches were exactly 2 feet wide, 6 feet long, and 2 feet deep, the size of graves. On the evening of December 20th, Gacy drove to his lawyer's office for a meeting. Upon arrival, Gacy was disheveled and asked Sam Amarant, his lawyer, for a drink. Sam produced whiskey and asked Gacy what he needed. Gacy picked up the copy of the Daily Herald from Sam's desk and pointed to the front page. It had an article covering Robert Piest and stated, "This boy, he's in the river. He's dead." Over the following hours, Gacy gave a rambling confession that ran into the early hours of the next day. Gacy told Sam he had been the judge, jury, and executioner for many, many people, and now he wanted to do the same for himself. He buried most of his victims in the crawl space and dropped others in the Des Plaines River. Gacy left his lawyer's office to attend to business and make preparations for his final day of freedom. As Gacy enjoyed what time was left, police put together the formal draft of the second search warrant. Upon hearing of Gacy's erratic behavior, the surveillance detectives arrested Gacy to ensure he would not try to commit suicide. He was informed of the second search warrant for the crawl space. Gacy finally spoke on the whereabouts of Piest. He claimed the boy was buried under his garage after Gacy killed him in self-defense. Armed with a search warrant, the police pushed on with digging up the crawl space. Within minutes, petrified flesh and a human arm bone were recovered. Gacy was now facing murder charges. The victim found was far too decomposed to be pieced, though. As they continued to dig, they found more and more skeletal remains, confirming the magnitude of Gacy's crimes. Ultimately, 26 bodies would be recovered from the crawl space, and 2 more would be found on the property. All victims were found in an advanced state of decomposition, causing investigators to rely on dental records, x-ray charts, and personal artifacts from the home. Several bodies were found with plastic around their heads, rope around their necks, and foreign objects in their throats and body cavities. Due to the long process of identification, each body was assigned a number. The 4 victims from the river were also recovered, including Piest. Gacy was brought to trial on February 6, 1980, and charged with 33 counts of murder. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours and found Gacy guilty of the 33 charges. He was also convicted of sexual assault and taking indecent liberties with a child due to Piest. This conviction was at the time the largest number of murders charged to one individual in U.S. history. Gacy was sentenced to death for each murder. Execution was initially set for June 2, 1980. He was transferred to Menard Correctional Center in Chester, Illinois, where he remained incarcerated for 14 years. During imprisonment, he had several interviews between 1979 and 1981 with Russ Ewing. Ewing would later collaborate with Tim Cahill to compose the book Buried Dreams. Gacy also spent a lot of time painting, stating he intended to bring joy into people's lives. His paintings have been on exhibition and sold for anywhere between $200,000 to $20,000. Gacy would file many appeals to try and save his life, but each one failed. His final execution date was set for May 10, 1994. Gacy's last meal consisted of a bucket of KFC chicken, a dozen fried shrimp, French fries, strawberries, and a Diet Coke. He also observed a prayer with a Catholic priest before being escorted to the execution chamber to receive lethal injections. Gacy's final spoken words were simply reported as, "Kiss my ass." A crowd estimated to number over 1,000 people gathered outside the correctional center, most in favor of the execution, with a few anti-death protesters holding a candlelit vigil. Gacy's death was confirmed at 12:58 a.m. on May 10, 1994. Through records and efforts, 27 of Gacy's victims were identified. Still to this day, 6 of the victims remain unidentified. Hey guys, thanks for watching. So, this one was a long one, and obviously it was a lot to take in. Gacy was definitely a cruel and just evil person. He destroyed so many young lives for his own sick perversions, and I find it really heartbreaking when you think about what the families endured for years, not knowing what happened to their children, and then discovering that this well-respected guy was the one responsible for their deaths. The whole thing is just, it's sad. It really is. And I think it's even more sad that there's still victims that are unidentified, so some families don't even have closure. But to kind of close this one out, if you guys like learning about these horrible people and, you know, the horrible things they've done, I have similar videos planned for the future. So, until then, I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!